The first image that you might conjure up would be the Last Supper. You would think that would be pretty good. Where would you find the real presence of Christ? But I would ask you to consider another answer in today's reading. Matthew chapter 18, verse 24. I would like to invite you to listen to these words and then share what this verse means to you. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am among them. Now, my husband Danny and I had this conversation, and he has a meaning for it, so I'm going to ask him to start from the crow's nest. So,
Worship is important in community. It means that you can't just go out in the woods by yourself and find that same meaning as you can when you gather.
anybody else having a, what does this verse, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am among them? Terry. There you go. Christ is sitting right beside Terry. So one of y'all is sharing a seat with Terry, with Christ back there, just so you know. Yes, Elizabeth. Absolutely. Absolutely. You don't have to be in the middle of a Taylor Swift concert to have God there. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, Larry.
When I read that passage, I think it means that faith can only grow if you're in community with others.
Yes. Anybody else? Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. When I was on internship to become a deaconess, my internship supervisor's name was David, Pastor David, and everybody called him PD. And I had my first evaluation, and I was scared, and I went in and sat in his office, and he said, I'll tell you what, I've done a lot of these evaluations over the years for interns. And what I know is they want one learning edge, and so I'm going to give you one. He said, first of all, I want you to know you're doing a good job, but they want to see some progress in something. So the learning edge that I've picked for you is that I have noticed that when you plan something, and at this point I was over new members and all of youth and family. He said, so when I see that you plan something like the communion banquet, first communion banquet, I see that you go all in, that a month ahead of time, you know what food's going to be served. You figured out how many people are going to come, where it's going to be held. You have dotted every I, crossed every T. You have got roses for the girls. You have got balloons for the boys. You have figured out how so-and-so's grandmother that has mobility issues is going to get in there. You have done every single thing that you can do. He goes, you attack things with such passion and with such wanting to get everything just right for everybody. And he said, and your learning edge is going to be that not everybody coming is going to have the same passion that you have about this. And they're not going to RSVP. Or if they do, they might not show up. And they may tell you they're bringing 3 people and they might bring 6. Or they might tell you they're bringing 6 and they might bring 3. Or they might show up late. Or they might not show up at all. He said, so your learning edge is going to be when you have put so much passion into something and someone doesn't meet your passion with their passion. I'm not telling you not to be disappointed, you just can't show it at the time. So I took a deep breath and I thought, how in the world am I going to do that? So what always would happen then after this, and it would happen that it would not meet the expectations I had because my expectations were up here and reality was down here. And inevitably somebody would say, you know, it really doesn't matter because God sends who God needs to have there at that moment. And where 2 and 3 are gathered, God's there, so we know God was there. That did not make it any better. I've just got to tell you. It was true, but it did not make it any better. Because for me, God was so exciting, and why you would not want to be there and be a part of that, I don't know. But anyway, that was my learning edge, and to be honest, it's something I still have to deal with. Because why would you not want to hear everything and be with all of the people with God all the time? But I know that not everybody, even in my family, agrees with that. So anyway, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. What I find so interesting is that the real presence of God in the Bible is found in this whole verse about conflict. I mean, really, that's where you're going to put the real presence of God, in conflict? But let's back up to how we got there. We're in Matthew chapter 18. So in Matthew chapter 17, we start with transfiguration. So what we know is that Jesus is up on that mountain. He took that step off, and he is going straight into Jerusalem to die. So we know we're at the third year of his ministry. We know we're at the very end. And on his way to the cross, there's a little boy that a demon has possessed. And so he goes and he takes the demon out of the little boy. So we know that there's evil in the world. Then the next thing that happens is that someone comes up and says, how are we going to pay our taxes? Roman wants to know. And he said, go fishing. Wouldn't you all love this, to be able to go out in Galveston Bay, go fishing and pull out everything you need to pay your taxes because it's in the fish's mouth? Pretty cool, huh? Well, that happened there. Hadn't happened to us yet. But anyway, so he knows that he's not only going to have to face evil, but he's going to have to face the Roman Empire, the government, the entities that are there. Then we go into chapter 18 and we hit the church stuff. So in Matthew 18:1, the community's told to be humble and teachable. And then in chapter 18:6, the followers are told that they need to attend to personal morality, because if you're going to be telling people how to act like Jesus, you need to act like Jesus yourself. Don't do one thing and tell them to do another. And then in chapter 18, verses 10, the faithful disciples are told to cultivate and care for one another. And then today's, we're told to resolve situations involving conflict. And then, surprise, surprise, right after that verse says you have to forgive people 70 times 7 times. All right, that's easy to do. So last week, this is why I just love this time of the year. Last week we got to talk about Satan, and this week we get to talk about conflict. 2 really important things people love to talk about: the evil in the world and having fights with somebody. So how do we deal with conflict? How do you deal with conflict? Do you fight it head on? Stand up proud and strong and just directly hit it? Do you run away from it like it never even happened? Do you gather all the people involved and say, hey, let's talk this out? How was conflict modeled for you as a child? Because chances are that's pretty much how you're going to handle it now, unless you learned different. How do you deal with conflict? You know, this is one of the questions that's almost always asked when a congregation is interviewing a candidate, is how do you deal with conflict? Have you ever had conflict in a situation, and how do you deal with that? I know I was asked that when I came here. But it's followed by the applicant saying, are there currently any conflicts from the past that this church is still impacted by? And if so, how are they still impacted? And almost every church has had a conflict in the past. And almost every church is dealing with some fallout from it. If not from everybody, by some people in the congregation. So conflict. I've got a video for you of conflict. I want to set this up for just a minute. This is there are 3 of them, but there's 2 in conflict 3-year-olds. And the conflict is very serious because one's mom says it's sprinkling and the other one's mom says it's raining. And there's obviously something to really get in a fight about with these two things. So let's watch the video.
It's sprinkling. No, it's raining. No. Hey, sprinkling. No, it's raining. No, it's sprinkling. No, it's raining. My mom told me it's sprinkling. It was raining. No. Yes, it is. My mom told me it was sprinkling, not raining. My mom said it is raining. No, my mom told me it was sprinkling. Because my mom didn't say it's raining. No, my mom said it's sprinkling. My mom said it's raining. Ow! My mommy said it's. Say sorry to the sprinkling. My mom told me it was sprinkling. My mommy is not. It's not. My mommy. It's sprinkling outside, Macy. It's raining. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, you're pretty. And you're not real. I'm real. Watch. We're going to go out there and see. I'm not going to see anymore. Watch is not going to see. Watch. We're going to go out there and watch. It was just raining. Because it's raining. No, it's not. It just rained. It just raining. Ow. It just raining. Little Clay. It's raining. You broke my heart. Little Clay. You broke my heart. Turn around and then I'm gonna get honey. And me and who can do that? Okay, deal. You broke my heart. Turn around then.
So conflict. Some of the things we fight about, is it raining or sprinkling? And then you notice he switches and says it is raining. And both of them got a little aggressive. And then I love the third one that was going, you tell them you're sorry. She's obviously had conflict resolution in her house. And both of them are, that finger is pointing left and right. But then he says, you hurt my heart. And that's what happens in conflict, especially when it gets nasty. You hurt people's hearts. You impact who they are and you change who they are. And it can be just a little bit. Like, I'm sure unless they see this video in 15 years, they're not going to remember the big debate about raining and sprinkling. But it could go on to where conflict can really change who a person is. Jesus realizes this and sets up a framework for the difficult conversations. He says if a brother or sister or someone who is in an intimate Christ-centered relationship with you sins, and a sin is anything that separates you from God against you, that the first thing you do is privately go to them and say, you hurt me. And if you feel like they heard you, then that's great. But if not, he outlines you go to step 2. And it says, take a couple of folks with you that you both can trust. This is not gang up on the person, but take a couple of people with you that both of you can trust and say it again. And if you're heard this time, that's good. But if not, go to step 3. And step 3 is to take the matter before the local body of believers, and if the offender still doesn't listen, then a bond is broken. That's when you hurt my heart. And the offender must be treated as an outsider. When we commit a sin against one another, we don't just impact one person, but we impact the community as a whole. You could see that in the video. You could see the two that were going at each other about, is it raining or is it sprinkling? And the third child that was going, don't you hit them. You need to say you're sorry. I mean, we had the director of every kind of conflict going on there. So it impacts everybody that's there. And you really can't see it this well. There's actually three videos of this on YouTube. And there's one that's even longer. And there's a child behind the little girl that's pointing her finger that has a hold of her shirt and is pulling her back. So it's really impacting more than just the ones that are there. When you have a disagreement with somebody, it impacts everybody you come into contact with that day. So they are also impacted by that sin. At stake in the issue of sin, confrontation, repentance, and forgiveness is the presence of God and what it means to all of us. The flow of the passage is more important to make a note of as there's movement from the individual to the communal. When they sin, Jesus says, confront directly, one-to-one, face-to-face. And if that fails, then take it to the community with just a few people, and if that still fails, then take it to the larger community. From individual confrontation to communal attention, the movement of the passage is the progression that follows the development of the conflict. The harmony of Jesus' teaching about conflict is all through the Bible. We have entire chapters in the Old Testament. We have Deuteronomy and we have Leviticus that talk about the codes and what you do. And there's something subtly different here, though, because in both of those, they're the little girl with finger pointing. But when we come to Matthew, which again is the bridge gospel from the Old Testament to the New Testament, it does not say that that person is a horrible person and kick them out and send them straight to hell. What it says is that there's not safety in numbers that you gang up on this person, but rather the safety of the numbers, the safety of everybody involved is what is important. Not just the person that was sinned against, but the sinner themselves. Because you know what? Everybody involves a sinner. And you could see it again in that video. You could see both of those kids going into it. So much so that the little boy goes from it's sprinkling to it's raining. I mean, he couldn't even keep his story straight. He was so just fighting back and forth. But the real presence of God. Following his teaching on the progression of the confrontation of sin in an attempt to reconcile, Jesus teaches that any sinner so committed to his or her position that they refuse to listen even to the church has to be treated like a Gentile and a tax collector. It's kind of ironic that he would use those two, and it's probably very intentional that he used those two. The line follows the parable of the lost sheep and precedes the response to Peter's question about how often do we have to forgive a brother or sister who sins repeatedly against you. And of course, we know from the Gospel of Matthew how Jesus always treated Gentiles and tax collectors. What did he do? He ate dinner with them. Yeah. So we're going to treat you like a sinner, and we are going to exile you, but come eat dinner with Jesus, because that's what he does. He does not exclude people and kick them out. That's what we would do as sinners. Jesus includes them. Notice that Jesus follows this talk about the power of agreement, saying anything that is agreed upon by two on earth will be done for them by the Father. It's a promise. But notice as well that it's not where Jesus ends. Jesus says last, where two or more are gathered in my name, I am present among them. Presumably, this includes the two who cannot listen to each other about the matter of sin and how to handle it. Even there, Christ is present. The subject matter in this passage could not be more fitting for Christian communities in every age and in every place, because there are conflicts constantly. And the ideal way to handle them is to go face to face and say, this really bothered me, and to be listened to, and ideally said, hey, I'm sorry. What happens if you come from a family that does not listen or was not taught how to fight, how to have a conflict? And then it can escalate to something that's so big that it really can split the church completely. Jesus does not want that to happen. But if you ever end up being on the end of the sinner, as the sinner, and the one that feels that you're being pushed out, know that Jesus is with you. And know that you are loved. And if you are the person that felt that you were sinned against, know that you are loved. And if you are the person that the person was sinned against that gets brought in, that trust, you are loved. Basically what this passage is saying is that we know there is going to be conflict. And the little girl in the video did such a good job. She just kept saying, just tell them you're sorry. It's really that easy. And in reality, it doesn't matter if it rained or if it's sprinkled. All that really matters is that you say you're sorry and you get along together in the end, regardless of what your mommy says. And all God's people say, amen.